when a government depends upon the armed part of the population, the army's views on what the government does and does not do are surely not a matter of indifference. Albrecht von Roon, Prussian Minister of War, May 29, 1864. On the 1st of August 1864, the Danish War finally came to an end, but the peace that followed was short-lived. For decades, if not over a century, bitter rivalries had simmered between Austria and Prussia. Despite their joint occupation of the territories, tensions remained high. Many believed that an era of harmonious cooperation between the German great powers was imminent, but fate had other plans. Bismarck, ever the cunning strategist, was not content with mere joint occupation. His ultimate objective was to annex both duchies to Prussia and neutralize Austrian political influence in Germany. He was willing to go to war to achieve this goal. In 1863, Bismarck had even suggested to the Russians that Prussia might soon launch a surprise attack on the Austrian Empire, just as Frederick the Great had done in 1756. To keep all options open, Bismarck dragged out the joint occupation while simultaneously picking fights with the Austrians at every opportunity. The victories of Prussia in Denmark not only had an impact on foreign affairs, but also had a significant effect on the domestic political landscape. The wave of patriotic enthusiasm that followed the triumphs led to divisions within the Prussian liberal movement, which had been the most powerful opposition to Bismarck's government. The liberals desired a settlement with the government, fearing that if the conflict continued, they would lose their hold on public opinion. During 1864 to 1865, Bismarck and his ministers resorted to manipulation tactics to control the parliament. They introduced bills that either divided the liberal majority or placed them in unpopular positions. One such bill was the Naval Construction Bill of 1865, which proposed the construction of 2 armed frigates and a naval base in Kiel. The liberal nationalist movement strongly supported this proposal, but unfortunately the Parliament rejected it because new funds could not be approved without a legal budget. He was able to take such risks because the Prussian government's coffers were overflowing. During the 1850s and 1860s, the Prussian economy had experienced significant growth due to the First World Boom. The expansion of railways, steel smelting and machine building industries, as well as the extraction of fossil fuels, led to rapid economic and social changes in the region. With a booming economy and overflowing coffers, Bismarck and his ministers could take risky measures to manipulate the parliament and control the political situation. The financiers are pressing loans on us without parliamentary approval, but we could wage the Danish War twice over without needing one. Otto von Bismarck, March 1865. The struggle over the fate of Schleswig-Holstein resulted in a diplomatic standoff between the Austrians and Prussians. Austria was at a disadvantage since the duchies were far from Vienna, and their interest in maintaining a troop presence there was not strong. In 1864, the Austrians presented Berlin with 2 options: to recognize the duchies as a separate state under the Augustenburg dynasty, or annex them to Prussia and compensate Austria with land along the Silesian border. Bismarck rejected both choices, stating that Silesia was not negotiable. In February 1865, Prussia made a provocative statement, declaring that it would view any form of independent Schleswig-Holstein as a Prussian satellite. The Prussians continued to expand their control over the duchies, angering the Austrians, who took the issue to the Confederal Diet and reintroduced the Augustenburg succession as an option. By summer, war seemed likely, but it was averted when Francis Joseph sent an ambassador to negotiate with King William. Politics is the art of the possible. Otto von Bismarck. In 1865, the Convention of Gastein was signed to establish joint Austro-Prussian sovereignty in the duchies. Schleswig was to be under Prussian control, while Holstein under Austrian control. However, Bismarck had only proposed this temporary solution to buy time. Prussian provocations in Holstein persisted, leading to Vienna being accused of violating the treaty. By February 1866, a council in Berlin declared that war with Austria was inevitable, citing Austria's treatment of Prussia as a rival and enemy and failure to honor the convention. Bismarck argued that Prussia's ambition to lead Germany had been unfairly blocked by Austria. The Crown Prince was the only one advocating for a non-military solution. Both the Austrian and Prussian governments were eager to secure allies in Germany before the war. Bismarck tried to gain support from the electorate of Hesse by offering them territorial compensation in the Grand Duchy of Hesse if they would ally with Prussia. But Elector Frederick William was offended by the idea and instead joined forces with the Austrians. During the spring of 1866, the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph sought to form a coalition against the Prussians and reached out to King George V of Hanover. Despite some initial doubts, the king eventually agreed to join forces with Austria. Soon after, many southern German states also allied with Austria, including the kingdoms of Bavaria and Württemberg, as well as smaller middle states like Baden and Nassau. However, most of the northern German states, such as Oldenburg, Mecklenburg and Brunswick, joined Prussia's cause, setting the stage for a deadly conflict between Germany's most powerful states. As tensions continued to escalate, war became all but inevitable. In the aftermath of the Crown Council in April 1866, Bismarck sought to secure an alliance with Italy against Austria. Negotiations between the two countries began, and they agreed to support each other in the event of a war breaking out with Austria within the next 3 months. However, Bismarck's attempts to incite a Hungarian revolution were unsuccessful. At the Crown Council on February 28th, Bismarck announced his intention to seek more definite guarantees from France, and negotiations between the two countries were initiated. While the specifics of the promises Bismarck made to Napoleon III are unclear, it is believed that French neutrality was secured in exchange for territorial compensations in Belgium, Luxembourg, and the region between the Rhine and Moselle, which included the Prussian Saarland and the Bavarian Palatinate. Austria had also secured French neutrality through similar means, including the creation of a French satellite state in the Rhineland. These agreements gave Napoleon III confidence that France would benefit from the Prusso-Austrian conflict, regardless of the victor. Russia's role in the conflict was crucial. In the past, Russia had opposed Prussia's unionist ambitions and had aided Austria during the Hungarian Revolution. However, by 1866, Russia was preoccupied with internal political reforms, and relations with Austria were still cool after Austria's betrayal during the Crimean War. Bismarck had cultivated relations with Russia since becoming minister-president, and there seemed little reason to fear intervention from this quarter. The conflict began on April 21st, when Austria partially mobilized its troops in response to unexpected troop movements in Italy. This led to a chain of mobilizations and countermeasures on both sides. In May, the German Diet demanded an explanation from Prussia for its mobilization. On June 11th, the Austrian ambassador proposed a resolution calling for the mobilization of the Confederation against Prussia, which was passed by a majority vote on June 14th. In response, the Prussian ambassador walked out, declaring the Confederation dissolved. The outcome of the war was not a foregone conclusion. In fact, Many well-informed contemporaries, including Emperor Napoleon III, who had fought against the Austrians in 1859, predicted an Austrian victory. In the meantime, Prussian troops moved from Schleswig, which was under Prussian rule, south into Holstein, which was under Austrian control. The Holstein estates were prevented from meeting, as armed guards stood watch with bayonets at the assembly hall door. Denmark posed no threat. Austrian commander Gablenz withdrew his 10th Corps across the southern German states to join Benedek's army. At noon on June 15th, Prussia issued 12-hour ultimatums to Saxony, Hanover and Hesse-Kassel, demanding that they stand down their forces and join the new Prussian state, or face war. At midnight, Prussia invaded all three states. The following day, Austria declared its willingness to help any state invaded by Prussia, which was seen as a declaration of war by Prussia. 2 days later, Italy also declared war. The army of the Kingdom of Hanover, comprising 2 divisions or 19,000 men under Major General von Arentschildt, found itself mobilized only because June 15th coincided with summer maneuvers. They barely escaped a Prussian invasion from Minden by moving south to Göttingen, abandoning their supplies and equipment. Prussian commander Falkenstein, who despised Moltke, ignored Moltke's orders. On June 18th, he arrived in Hanover a few hours after its army had left and declared a day of rest, despite Moltke's urgent requests to press on immediately southeast against the Hanoverian army. As the Hanoverian army rested in Göttingen, Moltke grew concerned that they might be joined by Bavarian forces moving northeast. He ordered Falkenstein to attack the Hanoverians 4 times, and when these orders were ignored, he suspended Falkenstein's command and issued orders directly to divisional commanders. General Eduard Fliess was directed to mobilize fortress troops from Frankfurt and move to Gotha. General Friedrich von Baer was instructed to move from Göttingen to Eisenach, and General Count von Groben was to go north towards Kassel. The Hanoverians, hoping for help from the Bavarians and the 8th Corps to the southeast, were left to face their fate alone. Moltke issued a 7th order to Falkenstein to put an end to the Hanoverian army on the night of the 26th of June. Meanwhile, Fliess was instructed to wait for the arrival of Bayer and Groben and hold Gotha and the Werra Valley against the Hanoverians. However, Fliess decided to attack the Hanoverians at Langensalza with his 9,000 troops and 22 guns, despite Moltke's advice to sit tight and prepare for a potential Hanoverian breakout. The Hanoverian army, led by Major General Alexander von Arentschildt, held a strong defensive position on the north bank of the river Unstrut. They had established outposts on the south bank, including in Langensalza. Their main force was spread out between the villages of Tamsbruck, Mörksleben, and Nagelstadt, all located on the north bank of the river and with a river bridge each. The central bridge was positioned at Mörksleben. Arentschildt strategically placed Bülow's brigade on the right at Tamsbruck, Vaux's brigade in the center at Mörksleben, and Bothmer's brigade on the left towards Nagelstadt, with Knesebeck's brigade held in reserve. The army, not including the largely unarmed reservists who had joined after the 15th of June, consisted of approximately 17,000 men. On the other side of the river, the Prussian force comprised 7 elderly battalions of the Landwehr, including the contingent of the Allied Duchy of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, with a strength of approximately 9,000 men. The Prussian forces were clearly outnumbered by the Hanoverians. On the morning of the 27th of June, the Prussian formation led by Major General Eduard Moritz von Fliess began their advance towards Langensalza. Fliess anticipated facing a rearguard of a retreating army, but the Hanoverian battalion covering the town had already withdrawn behind the river Unstrut. Undeterred, Fliess ordered his troops to occupy Langensalza and the nearby Judenhügel hill, which provided a strategic location for their artillery to overlook the Hanoverian guns on lower hills north of the river. The Prussians unleashed a punishing artillery bombardment on the Hanoverians. Then the Prussian infantry advanced towards the riverbanks, intending to cross it. The Hanoverians quickly regrouped and moved Knesebeck's brigade to the front to counter the Prussian attack. In a critical moment, Fliess succumbed to heat stroke and was incapacitated for the next hour, leaving his troops without direction. Although the Prussian troops deployed on the southern bank of the river, they were unable to make significant headway against the Hanoverians' strong defensive position. At the onset of the battle, the Hanoverians had assumed that they were facing a considerably larger Prussian force. The Prussian army launched a diversionary attack towards Tamsbruck, which the Hanoverians quickly saw through. The real assault, however, came towards Merxleben, which caught the Hanoverians off guard. Initially, the Prussian attack appeared promising, but soon they found themselves charging against heavily fortified positions. Realizing their advantage, Arent ordered a general attack across the river. The Hanoverians started their offensive on the right flank, with Bülow and Knesebeck successfully crossing the river and pushing back the Prussian left. It became evident that the Prussian commanders had made a mistake by charging forward, and the Hanoverians saw an opportunity to defeat the outnumbered enemy. The Hanoverian left, led by General Bottmer, attempted to cross the Unstrut River and outflank the Prussian positions. However, the terrain was not in their favor, and they suffered heavy fire from the Prussian needle guns. Their first attempt to cross the river was repulsed, and Bottmer refused to try again. Meanwhile, in the center, Vaux's brigade launched a successful attack with support from 2 battalions sent by Knesebeck. They managed to cross the river and capture Kallenberg's mill near the southern end of the bridge. This marked a turning point in the battle. As a result, the Prussian troops gradually withdrew from their partially fixed positions and retreated into town. The Hanoverians launched more attacks, and heavy fighting ensued. Eventually, Langensalza was recaptured, and the Prussians were pushed out of the village. As General Fliess regained consciousness, he realized that a retreat was the only option left for the Prussians. The troops were ordered to fall back to Warza, just north of their starting point at Gotha. However, some units received the order late and were left isolated from the main force. During their retreat, they were attacked multiple times by Hanoverian cavalry, resulting in some infantry being captured, while others managed to repel the attacks. The battle concluded in the late afternoon. The Prussian casualties were staggering, with 170 dead, 643 wounded, and 33 missing. According to the Hanoverians, 907 prisoners were taken, resulting in a total of 1,800 casualties. In contrast, the Hanoverians suffered 1,429 killed and wounded. The battle was a source of great embarrassment for the Prussian army. 45% of Fliess' army fled the battlefield, while hundreds pretended to be wounded or hid themselves on the field. The rest were pursued all the way back to Gotha, making the entire battle a disaster that achieved nothing. Casualty figures were deemed top secret and not made public for 5 decades. Sources conflict. Some state after the disastrous outcome at Langensalza, Fliess was swiftly removed from command. However, he commanded a battle against the Bavarians later in the war, so he was either reinstated or never removed. Von Goeben's division also managed to reach Eisenach. The Hanoverians found themselves surrounded by a force of 40,000 Prussians. By June 29th, the outnumbered Hanoverians were compelled to surrender under the generous terms of universal parole and rail transportation home for most troops. King George himself fled to Austria, which ultimately led to the end of the Hanoverian monarchy. the Hanoverian army was disbanded after Langensalza and the subsequent surrender. Despite the brevity of the battle, the larger war between Prussia and Austria raged on, and that same day the two sides clashed fiercely on the Bohemian front. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please leave a like, it really helps out the channel. If there is a topic, battle or person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and you want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 per month, you will already gain early access to all my videos without any in-video advertisements. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.